In late June, that measure was passed by the State Assembly and Senate, much to the chagrin of medical and mortuary schools, and is now awaiting a decision by Governor Cuomo. Joining us to give us the details of the bill and the thinking behind it is one of its authors, Assemblyman Michael Simanowitz of the 27th District in Queens. And welcome to BK Live.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right.
Well, the legislation is on the man's desk right now. He has until 2017.
Well, I don't think it's gotten to his desk just yet, but he has 10 days from the day it gets to his desk, so they tend to stagger them.
But it's passed the Assembly and the Senate.
Correct.
Could you tell us a little bit about why did you introduce this bill, what was the thinking behind it, and why it's so important?
So the genesis is actually very interesting, and the path we took is also interesting because it really took a lot of turns. But where it started was with the with some of the religious communities who were objecting to the fact that families were not being given the opportunity to claim bodies, or perhaps didn't know, or bodies that may not have had any family, but who may have been of a certain religious belief where they didn't believe in dissection or any of that. They wanted their bodies intact, right? And those beliefs weren't being taken into consideration. This bill was actually introduced a couple of years ago, and subsequently we started having conversations with the medical examiner's office here in New York, who, lo and behold, was thrilled with the bill. They loved the idea of the bill because under the law right now, under 4211 of the public health law in the state of New York, they have 48 hours to turn over bodies to the schools. In order for them to abide by that law, they open themselves up to lawsuits because in New York, there's a right of sepulchre. A person has a right to decide how their loved one will be buried. And unfortunately, what we've learned is that most of these bodies that were being turned over to the schools were either formerly homeless or people who were immigrants who didn't necessarily have families, or when I say immigrants, it could be from another country, it could be from another state. For example, there was a case where a body was turned over to a medical school, and I won't mention the school's name, but 3 years later, an ex-wife and an estranged child from another state came to New York City and said, we're looking for our loved one. Do you know where he is? And the answer was, he's in so-and-so medical schools.
This seems like such a non-issue to say 3 years later you show up and you're looking for dear old dad, but how would this law have prevented him from winding up in a student's classroom versus these people showing up 3 years after the death?
So right now, under this law, if the school or the medical examiner can obtain permission from a loved one, the body is buried by the medical examiner's office in one of the city cemeteries.
Right. These Potter's Fields sort of
right,
things.
That type of situation, and then you're dealing with just exhuming a body and turning it over to a family member, as opposed to turning over a body that's been carved up in all sorts. I mean, they work on those bodies for years.
We're talking about the advance of medical science versus a family who would show up some 3 years later. Like, who is the victim in this case, or something like that? This law wouldn't have even prevented that. They would have dug him up.
Well, from the medical school, from the medical examiner's perspective, you're right.
Yeah.
But what about the person's individual rights? So in the state of New York, of New York right now, all right, God forbid, I'm not going to use you as an example, but if this guy over here, is hit by a car,
right,
and is brought into the local hospital with a traumatic brain injury and is brain dead, and there's a 10-year-old child down the hall who needs a new heart, can the hospital just go in and harvest that heart and take it for that kid who needs it immediately?
So we have those little, I checked and I am an organ donor, just so you know. Is there any any provision that you might want to do something like that?
So the provision in this, and it's actually something that we're discussing to expand.
The donation.
But the provisions in the bill, and Chairman Gottfried worked with Senator Felder and I on this specific language that would not exclude the person's wishes. In other words, if somebody has it in their will or puts a card in their wallet, checks off that they want to donate their body, that's fine. And by the way, let's understand. I mean, I watched your video, and it talked about thousands of bodies. We're talking about the medical schools currently take approximately their need from the medical examiner's office is about 30 bodies.
Yeah.
It's about 30 bodies. And the medical examiner's office, to their credit, has said that they would work with the medical schools the same way they do with the organ donation. Right now, if somebody comes in and is brain dead, the example that I gave before, the medical examiner hands over that information to the organ donation people and says, here's this person, this is what we were able to find out, this is who the person is, this is where they live, this is who they next of kin may be, here's how you get in touch with them, let's see if we can find them. You know, here, the medical examiner's office says that in order for them to do the proper search would take them anywhere from 60 to 90 days.
Yeah.
60 to 90 days.
To do a proper search, right.
Okay.
Currently, they're violating the law by doing that. By saying that they're doing their due diligence, they're violating 4211 by not turning it over.
Just even with the reading with this segment, something that was interesting that I found out that you do in Chicago is that they actually take pictures of unclaimed bodies and they post those online in an effort to reach out to the kin. Is that something that New York has ever explored doing, possibly, or
not to my knowledge? But it's not a bad idea. Especially
been doing that for 3 years.
I mean, in New York City, you're talking about a lot of indigent and homeless people who may have family and just haven't been in contact with them in years, or maybe immigrants and their families out of the country. You know, anything you could do to reach out to the broader public when, you know, people may have been out of contact with their loved ones for 10, 15, 20 years. This gives them the opportunity to say, you know, I want to decide how it's done. And anyway, I didn't know that that's the way Chicago did it, but it's certainly something we'll look into.
Technology.
Absolutely, it's a good idea.
So medical schools have argued that the bill would jeopardize training for doctors by creating a shortage of cadavers. But then at the same time, some of them are on board for the legislation. So can you explain?
So listen, right now they have it very easy. You know, they don't have to do anything. They get the bodies, the medical examiner delivers the body. The medical examiner picks up the body when they're done with it, and the medical examiner disposes of the body. And most importantly, the medical examiner takes on the liability because the medical examiner is the one who's turning over the body. So for example, if you have a hospital, and we're not going to mention any hospitals' names because I don't want to single anybody out, but there are many medical institutions that have schools that are associated with them. A hospital has a dead body that they don't know, there's no next of kin, there's no body, there's nothing. They could turn that body over to their medical school. They don't. They wait the 8 days that the medical examiner requires them to hold the body. They wait the 8 days, they turn it over to the medical examiner's office. Then the medical examiner has 2 days to do it. But technically, they're violating the law because within 48 hours, they have to turn the bodies over to the schools.
So who's mad about this? We talked about a constituency of a particular religious group who might want bodies intact for their funeral rites or whatever it comes. But who's showing up at your office saying, this is a problem, we need to get this addressed? I've never heard of anyone having a problem about this.
So, you know, generally when you're the Orthodox Assemblyman, the Orthodox come to you. So that's where it started. That was the genesis. You know, the Jewish burial societies raised this as an issue. But I have to tell you, since the bill has been introduced and since it's started to get all this attention, it has picked up support across the. I mean, you're talking the Muslim community, the Hindu community. There are
numbers seem sort of minuscule that we're enacting these big laws for such a small sliver of the population where it can't be that much of a problem. Like really, this is one of the concerns this election year of the Jewish, Muslim, Hindu community.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a concern this year of an election year of that community.
But how do we find a balance between respecting the individual's rights and the kin, but at the same time sort of supplying the much needed cadavers for, you know, study?
Absolutely.
What's the balance?
And I think the medical examiner's office has made it abundantly clear that they are committed to working with the medical schools to ensure that their needs are met. There are and I should have mentioned this earlier, you know, there are approximately 700 to 800 bodies that the medical examiner knows who the family is. And the family says, you know, we don't have the wherewithal to dispose of the body. It's your problem. You take care of it. Yeah. In those cases, the medical examiner is all too happy to turn around to the medical schools and say, okay, here's the family's information. Just call them up and see if they'd be interested in donating the body to science. I think there is a balance. I don't think that the doom and gloom that the medical schools are talking about and the mortuary schools are talking about, because the mortuary schools have the ability to go into funeral homes, to do the embalming, to practice the embalming.
Yeah.
So that there is that possibility. And there's also the possibility of getting bodies. It's just not going to be as simple as it once was.
So the point is that science is not going to grind to a halt. People will not have any lack of training. The people who use these bodies are just going to have to get off their butts and work a little harder to get them.
Correct. Absolutely.
And you can also just check the box.
Correct. Right.
All right.
Well, thanks for bringing this to our attention.
Thank you for putting it on the air.
Watch out for your family members out there. Don't show up for Dad 3 years later and be mad. And to follow.
You'd be amazed how much money they get.
I always wonder how these things sort of work in New York.
That seems kind of criminal. I'd like to see a law against people profiting on never seeing someone.
You see how much the medical examiner pays out every year to family members.
We'll have to get you come back. All right.
There you go.
Thank you.